Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching the Daily Report for Monday, March 21st here in Korea. I'm Min Sun-hee. There's been a notable decline in our daily tally today, and I have Kwon So standing by with the details. So welcome.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
Right, so I suppose the weekend factor is one reason behind the relatively fewer cases here in the country on this Monday, So.
That's right, Sunny. But given that it's the first time in 10 days that Korea's daily COVID-19 caseloads have dropped to the 200,000 level, it may also represent a general downward trend. Let's take a closer look at the exact figure here. 209,169 cases were tallied as of 12 a.m. this Monday. And apart from 38 imported cases, the rest of them are domestic transmissions. Now, this Monday, it's notable that the caseload has not only dropped from the weekend, but if we compare this figure to last Monday, it marks an on-week drop by around 100,000 cases. And now let's take a look at our map where we can see a little over half of cases have occurred in the metropolitan region, with close to 57,000 cases in Gyeonggi-do province and a little over 41,000 in the capital's whole. And you can also see that many places are now reporting 4-digit figures instead of 5-digit infection numbers. And now let's move over to the total number of cases now that Korea has accumulated so far. We have hit now above 9.5 million in the total caseload, and also more than 12,700 COVID-19 related fatalities, with 329 people having lost their lives in the past day. This is the second highest number for a single day death toll. And we have also, for the 14th straight day, so for 2 weeks, the number of patients in severe or critical condition is remaining at above 1,000. Let's move over to our vaccination figures. As it was Sunday yesterday, not a lot of vaccinations were administered. Also on the booster shot front, we only got a triple-digit figure of people who got their third dose. And now let's take a look at the numbers globally. A little over 1 million new cases were reported in the span of 24 hours as of noon Korea time, with a little less than 3,000 fatalities. And meanwhile, over the weekend, South Korea and Argentina have hit the 9 million mark in their total caseloads, and Japan has hit 6 million. Vietnam has moved up a few spots here to become the country with the 13th highest caseload in the world. And those are the updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for now. And while we wait for you to get seated, we delve into the domestic COVID-19 situation as authorities here seek to boost their supplies of the antiviral treatment pills for patients in the country. Shin Yeon joins me now. Yeon, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Sunny.
Right, so authorities are planning to ship in supplies of Merck's molnupiravir this week, Yeon.
That's right. The government is planning to take delivery of Lagevrio, also known as molnupiravir, an oral COVID-19 pill manufactured by Merck. And this shipment of drugs, which is enough to treat 100,000 patients, is scheduled to arrive sometime this week. Interior Minister Chun Hae-chul on Monday announced the country's plans to bring in Lagevrio amid growing demand for antiviral pills. But Lagevrio hasn't been given the official green light from the country's drug regulator yet. They are reportedly still reviewing the drug, and some 95,000 courses of Pfizer's Paxlovid are also set to arrive in the country in April. As of now, only seniors aged 60 and up, the immunocompromised, and those 40 and over with underlying conditions like diabetes or cardiovascular disease are eligible for the drugs.
Right, and speaking about drugs, Yeon, I understand the country is reporting a severe shortage in drugs generally across the country amid the surging number of patients recovering at home, right?
That's right. Because the government has made at-home recovery the norm, most of the population had to buy their own drugs. In other words, those infected would call up local hospitals or clinics, which would then prescribe medication for those looking after them to pick up. But the problem was that there weren't enough drugs to hand out, not even cough medicine, because of an explosion in demand among those infected with COVID-19 or people reporting COVID-19-like symptoms. Take a listen to these pharmacists about the difficulties they're facing on a daily basis.
Whether it's a direct transaction or a wholesale drug, there's not enough medication left in stock. While there are more prescriptions, we're running out of both specialized and general drugs.
We can't place additional orders now because they won't come. so I have to dispense medicine with similar compounds. But I'm panicking because I can't do that forever. Of the 40 years since I opened this pharmacy, I've never faced this kind of situation before.
And it's not just pharmacies, but also crematoriums that are struggling to cope with the surging demand. Because we're seeing more deaths from COVID, many crematoriums are operating day and night. And typically, mourners held a 3-day funeral before cremating their loved ones. But because crematoriums are fully booked, mourners now have to wait a total of 5 or 6 days before the remains can be cremated and laid to rest. And authorities say they would consider building extra crematoriums and funeral homes if the situation continues. Take a listen to this manager at a crematorium in Incheon who's been cremating 100 bodies a day.
We've already added 30 more cremation slots a day. I don't know how longer we can handle this because all of our workers are exhausted.
Right, and we have more on that particular reality later on in our program. Also, Yeon, I hear another study shows that more Koreans are fatalistic about the future course of Omicron here.
Right, and this study is by the Graduate School of Public Health at Seoul National University. A team of researchers found that 1 in 3 Koreans believed they would eventually catch COVID-19. More than half of those surveyed also said it would be very difficult to contain COVID-19 at this point, considering the repercussions on both individuals and society at large. Over 1,000 adults took part in the study, which was conducted from March 11th to the 13th, and it was the first time more than 60% had answered that the pandemic cannot be tamed.
And I bet many people around the world can relate to that study. And also it can be stressful for people who have not yet been infected with COVID-19, knowing that it can happen any day. And on that note, I also want to mention a recent study focusing on the emotional toll that the COVID-19 pandemic has taken on the general public. Now, MIT researchers found that the pandemic mood was much worse than people's regular Monday mood. The paper, titled Global Evidence of Expressed Sentiment Alterations During the COVID-19 Pandemic, was conducted through the examination of 654 million social media posts on Twitter in around 100 countries that appeared during the early 5 months of the pandemic phase. So when compared to people's mood gap between weekends and Mondays based on emotions on social media, the onset of the health crisis caused an almost 5 times larger negative mood than the weekend Monday gap. The COVID-19 shock also led to significantly higher drops in sentiment than during extreme temperatures or hurricane periods. Meanwhile, the study said surprisingly, lockdown policies did not appear to have affected the public sentiment all too much, which can be attributed to a potential two-way impact, as some might feel stressed due to the social restrictions, but others might feel more secure thanks to lockdowns or social distancing measures.
Right, and speaking about social distancing, Korea has a few revised rules in place starting today, this Monday, right? Tell us about them.
Sure, Sunny. So South Korean health authorities have eased the country's social distancing guidelines to allow larger private gatherings up to 8 people, and this is 2 more than what had been a maximum of 6 people until Sunday. Business hours for restaurants and cafes will remain the same, though, having to close at 11 p.m. The easing comes despite concerns from some health experts that the move could aggravate the outbreak amid the rapid spread of Omicron. Officials said, though, that they would continue to make slight adjustments, only to the point where risk levels are acceptable and no strains are added to our medical system. And this explains why they've decided to not extend business operation hours from 11 p.m. to midnight. And more measures have been eased specifically for those who have been fully vaccinated. From Monday, travelers who have been fully vaccinated in Korea or abroad will be able to enter the country without spending 7 days in quarantine. Those who have been vaccinated overseas must submit a proof of vaccination to a public health center, though. Also, while this latest measure will apply to travelers from most countries, it won't be applied to those coming in from Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, or Myanmar who still have to quarantine.
Right, I see you. Thank you for the detailed domestic coverage. I'll see you back here on Tuesday. That's tomorrow.
Yes, thank you so much.
Right, meanwhile, on the international front, neighboring China is abiding by its zero COVID strategy. What's the latest there?
Right, China is further stepping up its efforts to contain the spread, as some 4,000 infections were reported on Sunday local time. And for China, that means more lockdowns. Tens of millions of people have been ordered to stay at home across the country. Jilin, the second largest city in Jilin province, was one of the latest to announce a lockdown of around 4.5 million people for 3 days starting Monday night. The capital of Beijing is also under high alert as the nearby city of Langfang reported more than 530 asymptomatic COVID-19 cases on Sunday, pressuring the Chinese capital as well. This official in Shanghai says the epidemic prevention and control has entered a critical stage.
We must conduct in-depth and meticulous epidemiological investigations, find out the source of infection, cut off the transmission routes, and win the battle of epidemic prevention and control with actions.
Right, and staying in Asia, so I hear India is slowly returning to its pre-pandemic life, while Indonesia appears to be strongly protected against COVID-19. Tell us about that.
Right, well, let's start in Indonesia, where a state-run survey assessed that 86.6% of Indonesia's population have developed antibodies against the coronavirus. And that even though only around half of them have been fully vaccinated. Out of those who received 2 vaccine doses, 99.1% of citizens carried COVID-19 antibodies, but they were also detected in 73.9% of their unvaccinated counterparts. According to an epidemiologist that is involved in the survey, this result shows that the level of antibodies is sufficiently high to prevent people from getting severely ill. India, meanwhile, posted 1,549 new COVID-19 cases on Monday, the lowest in 688 days. Also, with fewer than 200 deaths in the week ending on Sunday, the country recorded its lowest weekly death toll in almost 2 years. India, which had once been the hotspot of the Delta wave, is loosening antivirus measures, including mandatory mask wearing and self-testing before going to school.
And on a rather grave note then, over in the US, concerns are mounting over stealth Omicron, especially in New York. Tell us about that.
Yes, while the BA.2 subvariant of Omicron has gradually become the dominant strain in some countries around the world, there are concerns the same will happen in the U.S. Now, while it currently accounts for around 23% of COVID-19 cases in the country, in New York, the stealth Omicron is already rapidly spreading. According to the CDC, the BA.2 subvariant already accounts for 39% of cases in New York and New Jersey, doubling in just around a week. While some warn the BA.2 could be a new threat, others say this variant is not expected to fuel another national surge, given the higher number of people fully vaccinated and boosted. Now, on the global front, the World Health Organization considers the BA.2 strain now to be the dominant strain around the world.
Right, I see. So thank you for that. I'll see you on Tuesday.
See you, Sunny.
We start our news segment on this Monday afternoon here on the Korean Peninsula. Pyongyang has yet to publicly address the most recent round of missile tests which took place this past weekend. Kim Dami has our top story.
North Korea stayed quiet on Monday on its test firing of artillery the previous day. None of its state media, such as the Korean Central News Agency, have announced any related reports, which could mean the latest activity was a part of the regime's ongoing wintertime military exercises. The North on Sunday fired 4 rounds from multiple rocket launchers into the West Sea from an unidentified location in Pyongan-namdo province. Such a silence is a rare move considering the regime is usually quick to report on major missile launches and successful new weapons tests. For instance, the regime did not issue a word about the apparent failure of an ICBM launch last Thursday, but Pyongyang boasted about the launch of an ICBM disguised as a reconnaissance satellite earlier this month. South Korea's Unification Ministry said on Monday that Seoul will manage situations on the Korean Peninsula peacefully and stably and prepare for all possibilities.
We urge the North to immediately halt unilateral moves that go against peace and stability in the region and come to the path of dialogue and cooperation suggested by Seoul and the international community.
South Korea's National Security Council also held an emergency meeting on Sunday and said the country's military will maintain a strong readiness posture based on the alliance with the U.S. to make sure there is no lapse in security during the upcoming change of administration. Meanwhile, the North's weekly propaganda publication 통일신보 lashed out as hard in Washington on Monday for looking to carry out joint military drills next month, calling the move an obvious provocation. 김다미, Arirang News.
On the international front, Russia appears to be raising its brutal bombings of civilian targets that have been bearing the brunt of Kremlin's atrocities across Ukraine. Song Yujin reports.
Russia's attack on Ukraine has been going on for almost a month, but the onslaught shows no signs of letting up. A Ukrainian human rights ombudswoman took to Telegram on Sunday local time, saying that Russian tanks bombed a care home located in the eastern Luhansk region on March 11th, which resulted in the immediate death of 56 seniors. She added that some 15 survivors were forcibly taken to a nearby city under Russian control. Russia also confirmed on Sunday that it had conducted more attacks on its neighbor.
During the day, Russia's tactical aviation hit 89 military facilities of Ukraine, including 4 control centers, 2 multiple missile launcher systems, 9 artillery systems, 5 weapons and munitions depots, and also 65 places of deployment of military vehicles.
The daily bombardments have resulted in a skyrocketing number of refugees and deaths. The United Nations Refugee Agency announced on Sunday local time that roughly a quarter of the total Ukrainian population, 10 million people, have been displaced from across the country. With women and children accounting for 90% of the refugees, the risk of human trafficking is looming, especially over child refugees. The UN Human Rights Office also reported at least 902 civilians had been killed, but the actual number is expected to be considerably higher due to delays in transferring information. Meanwhile, international society is keeping a close eye on China regarding its possible assistance to Russia. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, told CNN on Sunday that Washington made it clear that there will be consequences if China decides to provide military or financial support. She also called on Beijing to not defend what is indefensible, referring to Russia's aggression. However, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi stressed on the same day that Beijing is opposed to war and sanctions in solving conflicts during a joint press conference held after talks with its Algerian counterpart. China has refrained from labeling Russia's assault as an attack, but saying it's against war could hint at a shift in stance, considering growing global condemnation of Moscow. Over in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke with CNN also on Sunday, saying he is ready for negotiations with Russia and warning that failure in talks could lead to a third world war. 송유진, Arirang News.
In other news, early detection of disease allows for better delivery of effective care. Having said that, a group of researchers here in the country have come up with a convenient way of detecting cervical cancer. Arirang has details.
According to the World Health Organization, cervical cancer is the 4th most common cancer in females. However, early detection and vaccination have made cervical cancer the only type of cancer that has decreased in prevalence over the past decade. Unfortunately, there's actually been an increase of 8.1% among young women in their 20s and 30s over the past 9 years. In South Korea, any adult woman can receive a free cervical examination once every 2 years, but the actual screening rate among women in their 20s is a mere 20%. Going to the OB/GYN itself can cause psychological distress, as can the testing method. To encourage testing among younger women, South Korean researchers have successfully developed a new screening method for cervical cancer through a urine test that can be self-conducted. A classifier has been developed that emits fluorescence when met with cysteine in the urine of people with cervical cancer. And compared to the existing method for screening that takes up to a week, this new method gives results in under 30 minutes.
The test needs 200 microliters. That's roughly 1 drop. That's enough for the test. The classifier emits yellow fluorescence when cervical cancer is detected in just 5 to 10 minutes, a maximum of 30 minutes.
More than 1,700 clinical samples show that this new method of testing yields results quickly and also has a high accuracy of 90%.
This method doesn't require sample pre-treatment. And further, we've tested the efficacy of screening after freezing the urine for a certain period of time, and this method has proven to be versatile.
The researchers explained that they have completed the patent application for this developed technology, and they are now looking to commercialize this new technology to be used in general checkups for women or in the form of diagnostic kits. 이은진, Arirang News.
On the pandemic front, to offer you a better understanding of the treatment procedure facing the almost 2 million people with COVID-19 currently recovering at home here in the country, our Chair Min-jung shares with us her own recent battle with the virus. Do take a look.
Some people say that Omicron is not something you avoid. It's something you just wait your turn for. And my turn has already come. I contracted COVID-19 and spent 7 days isolating and recovering at home. And I wanted to share with you what hundreds of thousands of people who are infected are going through. After testing positive at a local hospital, I was prescribed with 3 days of flu medication as I was not eligible for Paxlovid. I was then required to take an online epidemiological survey conducted by the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency. Once the survey was completed, the Seoul Metropolitan Government provided guidelines on the different types of services people can make use of while they recover. And those who need to get medication due to worsening symptoms can consult a doctor by calling a nearby hospital or clinic or a 24-hour emergency hotline.
증상은 언제부터 있었어요?
토요일 오후요.
토요일 오후. 증상은 어떤 증상 있어요?
지금은 기침이랑 목이랑 코 쪽에 아픈 거는 계속 있었고요, 토요일부터.
네.
근데 오늘부터 머리가 계속 어지러워가지고.
After I was released from quarantine, many questions came to mind. Like, is it really safe for me to be outside just after 7 days? And does still having some slight symptoms like a cough mean I could still be infectious? To clear things up for the hundreds and thousands of people out there who are infected, I'm at a hospital to talk with a medical expert.
확진자가 7일 격리 이후에 일상으로 회복을 하는데 이게 7일이 충분한가요? 안전할까요?
The virus peaks between 3 and 5 days after symptoms appear. However, a very small amount of the virus may still remain after a week or two.
격리가 해제된 이후에도 증상, 기침 같은 증상이 오래 남을 수가 있는데 이것도 혹시 일상 회복에 조금 안전할까요?
Even if symptoms like a cough or muscle pain remain after 2 weeks, there's almost no chance of spreading the virus to others. But if the symptoms do last for more than 2 weeks, it is recommended to see a doctor and, if necessary, undergo treatment.
Many are also curious to know whether it is possible for people to catch COVID-19 again after contracting it the first time.
Studies have shown that people who have been infected with Delta have an around 56% chance of being protected against Omicron. But we can say there's almost no chance for people once infected with Omicron to get infected with it again.
Now that we have the facts, it's relieving to know that people who have been infected with Omicron are very unlikely to be infected again. But for many, the COVID-19 experience can be traumatic. And to get help, people are turning to post-COVID psychological counseling provided by the Health Ministry. The National Center for Mental Health sends a text message to everyone who has been infected and provides them with hotline numbers or links to a website. People who wish to get counseling, regardless of how severe their COVID-19 symptoms are, can get help anytime.
8 in 10 people worry that they have caused inconvenience to others. And 7 in 10 people worry over what others will think of them when they get infected. And knowing that I'm not the only one having these thoughts is very important for people's mental health.
The country's total number of COVID-19 cases has surpassed the 8 million mark, but health authorities and medical experts say that when given proper medication, COVID-19 could eventually be treated like the flu. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Mourning our loved ones has become more difficult in light of the pandemic as burial practices are adjusted to better accommodate the painful surge in COVID-19 fatalities while keeping the virus itself at bay. We have details in this report.
The Omicron surge in Korea has also brought with it record numbers of daily fatalities in recent weeks. The number of deaths linked to COVID-19 spiked well into the triple digits as the calendar flipped to March. The surging death toll has led to long waiting lists for funeral homes and cremation sites across the country. Many online users have had little luck in successfully booking a date on the government-run website for cremation services.
평소 동절기에 화장 수요가 커지는 상황에서 코로나 사망자가 더해지며 최근 화장 수요가 크게 증가하고 있습니다.
Up until last year, patients who had succumbed to COVID-19 had to be cremated prior to their funeral services as part of the government's prevention guidelines. However, after having determined that the remains of COVID-19 victims pose little risk of an infection, the government is now allowing funeral services to be held before they're cremated and laid to rest. Despite this, many funeral homes are still reluctant to accept the remains of COVID-19 victims over lingering fears of possible transmission.
1월 27일 개정을 하고 초반에는 그런 실제로 이제 장례식장을 구한다거나 이랬을 때 우리 장례식장은 어렵다, 안 되겠다 이런 경우들이 꽤 많았었습니다. 근데 이제 계속 관련 단체 협회 같은 곳에서도 계속 이제 먼저 앞서서 이제 이거를 참여해 주시고 괜찮다라는 것들을 계속 주변에 이제 홍보를 했었습니다.
A typical Korean funeral lasts for 2 nights and 3 days, followed by burial or cremation. But the rising number of COVID-related deaths and seasonal factors associated with the colder months of the year have led to many delays in the cremation process.
3일장이 힘들어서 제일 빠른 게 이제 4일장 또는 5일장. 너무 길어지게 되면 진짜 6일장까지도 장례 일정을 진행을 해야 되는 경지까지 이르렀고요. 가까운 근교에 있는 화장장을 이용을 하시는데 지금 그쪽 분야에서도 없는 상황이라 지방까지 내려가셔서 화장을 하고 또 올라오셔야 되는 상황도 왕왕 생긴 건 있습니다.
The matter of safely storing the remains of the deceased while they await cremation has also become a serious challenge.
사망자가 급증하면서 화장 예약이 지금 안 되고 있으니까 일단 병원 장례식장의 영안실 그 고의를 모시는 냉동고가 지금 꽉 차버린 상태입니다. 이렇게 사망을 해도 고인을 모시고 장례식장에 영안실에 안치를 못하니까 뭐 영안실 바닥에 모셔놓는다든가 분향소에 모셔놓는다든가 이런 상황이 벌어지게 되고 그 유족들의 어떤 불만도 지금 계속 증가하고 있는 상황인 것 같습니다.
To address this issue, the government announced a plan to ramp up the operation of crematoriums nationwide.
화장시설의 운영 시간을 지역 상황을 고려하여 지역별로 2시간에서 6시간 정도 연장하고 화장 회차도 최대로 운영하는 조치를 시행합니다. 현재 화장로 한 기당 하루 평균 3.3회를 가동하고 있으나 이를 최소 5회 이상으로 증가시킬 것입니다. 특히 수도권과 광역시 등 대도시의 경우는 최대 7회까지 확대할 예정입니다.
Experts are also calling on health authorities to tackle the root of this problem by lowering our number of fatalities from COVID-19.
결국은 이제 그 오미크론 유행 상황에서 이게 이제 화장시설이 부활한 얘기는 이제 사망자 수가 늘어서 이제 문제가 되고 있다라는 건데, 결국은 이 유행의 이제 피해를 어떻게 최소화할 것인가, 특히 이제 위중증과 사망을 어떻게 막을 것인가 이제 이게 가장 중요한 이슈가 될 수밖에 없는데요. 경구치료제 대상의 고위험군들이 빨리 진단받고 치료받을 수 있는 그런 체계를 만드는 것이 사실 현실적으로는 지금 위중증 환자와 사망을 줄일 수 있는 방안일 수밖에 없을 것 같습니다.
Korea's overflowing morgues and funeral homes are an unfortunate reflection of our surge in COVID-19 cases and deaths that must be addressed as we continue to chart an exit strategy from the pandemic.
In our panel discussion on this Monday, we reassess Korea's Omicron outbreak amid predictions of a peak this week to pave the path for a more contained situation as we look ahead to a warmer season of spring. For more, I have Professor Kim Moon-gyu from Yonsei University. Professor Kim, it's good to have you back here in the studio.
Great to be here again. Thank you.
I also have Professor David Kwok from Sooncheng University. Professor Kwok, welcome back.
Good afternoon.
Right, Professor Kim, health authorities here believe that the Omicron wave, or our Omicron wave, will come and go sometime this week. Do you share this outlook?
As I see the number of today, I was very happy. You know, it was decreased, and actually, if we look at the 7-day average of Korean cases, you know, we had a 2-month continuous rise, and now we have a little bit of ditch. I hope that there will be a peak, and then we can say that we're passing through the peak. But it's very hard to expect. Anyway, it's encouraging. Many European countries ease their measures, and you know they don't wear masks, and even they stop isolating people coming from other countries. As a result, some of them are showing resurgence, and is it because of this BA2 or stealth Omicron or not? We don't know yet. So I think 1 or 2 weeks more, we need to make a conclusion. And but even though we passed this peak, we have to be vigilant because we don't know whether a new variant might emerge, and we also have to care about the ICU situations.
Right, which remains above 1,000 for the 14 days straight, right?
Yeah.
Professor Kwok, starting on this Monday, as my colleague Yeon mentioned, the cap on social gatherings has been lifted to 8 people. Now, some experts believe this move itself may aggravate or perhaps delay our Omicron peak. What are your thoughts?
As Dr. Kim mentioned and explained, we might have overcome the peak. There's a possibility of that. And if that is so, I don't think the changes made in the social distancing guidelines will affect greatly of further transmissibility, because it'll probably mean that we've already gone through the highest transmissibility in the past week or so. But despite that, there is one clear study that was reported by CDC that compared different kinds of social distancing measures as to how effective it was in preventing and stopping the transmission of the virus itself. And they actually found complete isolation of a focal geographic area to be not as effective as expected. But only one thing that was effective was changing of curfews and times of bars and such venues that was run. So in that regard, I think changing from having people gather only from 6 people to 8 people will further enhance the possibility of people gathering more in such venues, so that it can also increase the transmissibility in the long run. But once again, as I said, if we were to have gone over the peak already, and I've actually saw that, as our reporter Kwon's already mentioned, we have dropped about 120,000 or so compared to the last week, and I think that's quite significant. And today, so far, yeah, we're seeing a very low number still accumulating within the day, and I'm having my fingers crossed that that'll stay that way. If that is so, I don't think this whole discussion about whether or not the social distancing guideline would further affect the transmission or containment of transmission will have any impact anyways. I think we should rather focus on, as Dr. Kim and you already also mentioned, that we really need to focus now on containing of the numbers being admitted to ICU units, and also having blocking people from dying from COVID-19. And that can only be done by really focusing our all energy to the most vulnerable population, people with heavy underlying diseases and whatnot. So I think I just want to emphasize in this moment that we really need to be focusing more on protecting those who are more vulnerable.
Right, and talking about people who are more vulnerable, Professor Kim, there are calls for tougher restrictions at high-risk facilities, including nursing homes. What are your thoughts?
Yes, nursing homes and also hospitals caring about severe cases. I would say that if we had a barrier at the entrance point, like airport or seaport or something, now I think that barrier should be for those facilities caring for elderly patients with underlying conditions. But since we give up that epidemiologic investigation, we don't know where it's coming from, how is it coming from, and we have this huge number of patients. So we are living in a Omicron era, high transmissibility, even though it's low mortality. So if we want to lower the severe cases, we need more care about those facilities, more manpower, our nursing homes, and those facilities must do the PCR test before rapid antigen test because it's not that accurate. And we should include people caring for those elderly and family members also. So if one of your members works at those facilities, I recommend to try PCR even before you do the rapid antigen test.
Right, just to be safe.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Professor Kwok, how might the growing number of stealth Omicron infections affect perhaps the course of our current outbreak?
Well, it's a tough call to make on that issue because different countries are currently showing different curves despite having about the same composition of BA2 composition, namely the stealth Omicron. It's named so because it cannot quite well be discerned as being an Omicron, but it mimics a fashion of Omicron in its composition of genomic codons. Currently, we're seeing in countries like the UK, France, and Germany to actually be resurging back up quite highly in their daily confirmation cases, and also currently having a increasing percentage of BA2 variant in their composition. But it's also the same in the US, except it keeps declining in their daily confirmation cases. So we cannot solely blame on the composition of the stealth Omicron to be manufacturing higher numbers of daily confirmation cases to actually bring the curve back up, because these different countries are showing different results despite having a huge portion of it. I think mainly in the European countries, the resurgence is quite possibly due to, once again, their drastic change of social distancing guidelines. They're set to currently be opening their borders up to like everyone who's coming into the country, whether or not they need quarantine measures. Such drastic measures would affect the domestic cases because there will be continuous inflow of daily confirmation cases anyways. On the contrary, I think the US, having had open borderlines already throughout these pandemic history, would not be so affected by the effective or the power of BA2. So in that regard, as we are growing in our own composition of BA2, unless something drastic happens in the social distancing guidelines or something that affects the transmissibility of the disease itself, I don't think we're going to see a huge, let's say, resurgence resurgence in the curve or are huge changes in the transmissibility for that matter, because we've sort of prematurely begun the changes in our social distancing already. And I don't think that is bound to change stepwise once again. I think it's going to stay rather more smooth in its progress. So I don't think the changes in the composition of BA2 is really going to affect our own curve in that matter.
Right, and I sincerely hope you're right, Professor Kwok.
Me too, actually.
Professor Kim, reinfections have been relatively common amid Omicron. Do tell us a bit about the criteria to classify a reinfection case.
It's very confusing because we have a name repositive and reinfection. First of all, let me explain about what is repositive is. You know, even though we recover from Omicron, any COVID-19, you might still have positive results from PCR. And if it's within 90 days, and if the CT value is higher, you think it is repositive. This does not mean you are still infected with that virus. You may spread some virus particles out of your body, but it does not necessarily mean it is infection. CT value is something very confusing, but you can understand that if the value is low, you have a high virus loading. If CT value is high, over 35, that means the viral load is very low. You have a very low possibility to transfer the virus. So now let me explain about what is reinfection. If it's more than 90 days after the previous infection of COVID-19, and if the CT value is less than 35, we define it as a reinfection. And some people say that Omicron has a high reinfection rate, but it's a little bit tricky to say that, you know, if you had a previous variant infection like a Delta or anything else, and then if you get Omicron, it's possible, but we don't have the data about having Omicron and getting Omicron one more time. So we don't have the data about that yet. So 90 days should pass and then we can have the data.
Right, I see. And in the meantime then, Professor Kwok, how do you explain this reality of rising reinfections in light of Omicron, and what are its implications?
Well, as Dr. Kim also said, it's possible that we would be getting Omicron infection, a super infection that was done to a person who was infected with other variants. Because we haven't had much time only with Omicron yet, those so-called cases of reinfection that we're currently talking about may well have been really infection breakthrough cases that was broken through by Omicron to a person who's had, let's say, Delta variant. Omicron, from the get-go, has already been studied to be able to very easily make breakthrough infections to people who's had COVID-19 or who are protected through, let's say, intentional immunization through vaccination. Mainly because the major variant of its genetic codon that's comparable, well, that's the differentiator from past variants, is on the attaching site. And we mainly focus on our immunization on the attaching site. We immunize ourselves, or we focus on immunizations against attaching site because we think that will protect us from being infected. Now, Omicron having these differently morphological attaching site compared to, let's say, other variants from before, it would more easily, comparatively to the prior infective sources, attach still, despite having a person be immunized, whether that be through natural immunization or vaccination. So, in theory, these reinfection cases, thinking about the possibility, it's more likely that these reinfection cases are actually due to a person having had prior variants, but now being infected with Omicron variant than a person having to go through 2 times of Omicron variant infections. Because if a person was to have grown immunization against specifically Omicron variant, it's very much likely that that person would have immunization not just in the sense of antibodies, but other types of immunity specifically against Omicron variant. So that person would theoretically be much preventable to be infected by the Omicron variant.
Right, I see. And moving forward, Professor Kim, last week Israeli authorities reported a new strain that was a combination of Omicron and stealth Omicron. Could you tell us a bit more about this finding?
Well, it's something we can expect. It's kind of a subvariant that having both characteristics of Omicron and stealth Omicron. And it's not the only one. In USA and other countries, they found a new variant and named it Delta Cron, also meaning it having the characteristics of Omicron and Delta variant. It is too early to say we should worry about it or not, but the important thing is it doesn't matter how we find characteristics in molecular studies. The important thing is how our body responds to those new variants. So if our body reacts as same as Omicron, there's nothing to worry. It's nothing new, I mean. But there's no guarantee that there will be no virulent strains anymore. There's no guarantee about that. You know, after Omicron, we might have a highly contagious, highly mortality Pi or something else. So we must control this pandemic before things get worse.
Right, and speaking about controlling the pandemic, Professor Kwok, Korea's Celltrion has secured a generic license to produce Pfizer's Paxlovid. How does this license perhaps look to affect Korea's own supplies of COVID-19 treatment pills?
Well, numerically speaking, I guess it would help, because being able to manufacture more doses for ourselves would obviously put ourselves in a better position to fight against this virus. But we're already seeing decline in the number, and we mainly have to focus with more vulnerable population. Paxlovid being used in the vulnerable population, but also at the same time very limited, because people who are more vulnerable tend to be also taking medications that are heavily metabolized through liver, which prohibits the use of Paxlovid. So I believe the government has made a statement today that they're going to import 100,000 doses of molnupiravir. In any sense, I think manufacturing more medicine that we can have in handy so that just in case numbers start to rise again, or we need the medication to fight against the virus, it'll be very helpful. But also in a sense that there is a certain limitation to Paxlovid specifically. I think we need to start thinking about more keeping the balance of different kinds of medication that we can use in the same group of people. I think we also need to start talking about whether or not we can possibly use corticosteroids in these vulnerable populations, because many doctors around the world, even though it was not formally studied yet, and currently CDC is not currently recommending highly on the use of corticosteroids, it seems like clinically people are finding out it is very effective in minimizing harsher symptoms of currently infected COVID-19 patients. So different kinds of a diversity of medication, whatever we can get our hands on, the more we can have them, I think we'll be ready.
Right, and speaking about diverse treatment options, Professor Kim, health authorities here are also looking to approve Merck's molnupiravir. What can you tell us about the merits of adding this particular antiviral pill to our treatment arsenal?
We have to compare with Paxlovid first, but I'm sorry that it's not that effective as Paxlovid. I mean, Paxlovid is known to have above 90% of effectiveness, but molnupiravir was originally said that only 30% of effectiveness. Paxlovid has a shortcoming, as Professor Kwok mentioned, many precautions. Some people cannot take it because they're already taking other kind of medications. But molnupiravir is relatively safer than Paxlovid. There was a recent article from British Medical Journal insisting that it's about 50% effectiveness, but it's only studied with unvaccinated people. So I think that's the reason they have a higher effectiveness. So if Paxlovid is not available, if we don't have it enough, I think there will be a role for molnupiravir. But there are two things we have to remember about molnupiravir. It causes a mutation in coronavirus. So if some fatal mutation happens, the virus will die. But same can happen. This kind of mutation can happen to mammalian cell in vitro. So if somebody is pregnant or should be cautious, we cannot use this drug. And as this drug is causing mutation, we have to take this medication just as prescribed. I mean, we have to keep the rules. Remember in 2009, we had a flu, and we had Tamiflu. Tamiflu was same when we used a 5 days course, but it was strongly recommended to keep on 5 days. I mean, you might feel better and stop it with 2 days or 3 days, and that will end up a new variant of influenza virus. I think it should be applied same as molnupiravir. If you want to take it, you better keep it the 5 days course.
Right, so you have to be strictly adhering to the prescription.
Follow just as the prescription is ordered.
All right, I see. Professor Kwok, medical practitioners who are at home with COVID-19 have been temporarily permitted to engage in telemedicine. This reality, I'm sure, shows us that there's a dire shortage of labor in the medical arena. And having said that, how effective is this particular practice of telemedicine?
I guess it'll be the best alternative to what we have in regards to human resources. I am visually seeing that there are departments even within our hospital, due to doctors and nurses being infected, they have to be out for a certain period of time. And without personnel, we're not going to be able to treat our own patients. There are certain type of patients doctors and nurses can still be able to help over the phone, such as making a prescription, because we can still consult them accordingly to their verbal consultative symptoms. So I think it'll be the best alternative, but this temporary measure, I think, will be taken out in a very brief period of time, because as we're going through this, the doctors and those medical personnel currently being infected will only be out for, let's say, a week or two. And if we go through it all together, let's say I'll give it about 3 to 4 weeks before everybody returns to their job and start actually treating patients on face-to-face. So this is temporary. I want to emphasize that this telemedicine is not something that should stay, but it is only a temporary best alternative measure. I think it would also work as the best alternative measure. Right,
at this particular moment in our fight against the pandemic. All right, Professor Kwok, thank you very much for your thoughts. Professor Kim, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, as mentioned earlier, the cap on social gatherings here in Korea has been raised to a maximum of 8 people starting today, that is Monday, while business hours at drinking and dining establishments end at 11 p.m. Do take care. Thank you for now.
early in the morning when I exercise. This moment in this place is so precious to me. I've never forgotten my dream to become a Taekwondo master here in Korea. What is my day like? I'm so busy that time just flies by. Sometimes it's harder than what I had imagined.